Hey guys, and welcome to my wrap up of all the books that I read in the month of April. I have 13 different titles that I'm going to be talking about with you guys today. Some I did like, some I didn't care for as much. Today we are coming from the location of my living room floor because my bedroom is currently a mess right now because as you guys are watching this, by the time this goes up, I will currently be in Hawaii. So I'm in the middle of packing, but I wanted to still get a chance to talk to you guys about what I read last month before we're already basically into June. So let's get into the books that I read last month. These are not going to be in any particular order. I am just kind of going to go in the list of the order that I wrote them down in. So the first two books are kind of similar in that I started them in April, I believe, and I started them in March and I finished them in April. The first one is a nonfiction book, and that is Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sophie Thanhauser. This is a nonfiction book that was released, I believe, fairly recently, and it's, like the title would imply, a history all about clothing. So it's kind of split into 5 different sections based off of the different types of fabrics. So the different sections are linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and wool. I really found some of this to be really interesting. I gave it 4 stars. I think the thing that kept it from being a full 5-star read for me was some of it did come across a little bit textbooky, dry in some areas. Some parts I found a little bit boring, or like I felt like they could have been maybe told in a more interesting way because I found myself losing like interest in some certain portions, and I think that maybe it was just like the writing, but overall I still like this book. It's very good. I'm going to be keeping it on my shelf. Maybe in the future I could see myself rereading this book again, so that's why I want to keep it as well. I already know that we do so many terrible things to the planet and to ourselves as people with our the production of all these different materials, and a lot of these materials, the history of them has a lot of things to do with politics and things. So altogether, I would recommend this if you are into nonfiction, and specifically if you are someone like me who is interested a bit in fashion and in clothing and the materials that we make it from, and then I think you would enjoy this book. The other one that I started in March and finished in April was A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. I really love this edition. I picked it up recently from Book Depository, and they have some really cool illustrations in here. The artist is Gary Gianni. Let's see if I can show you guys some. So there's so many illustrations in here. There's one on nearly every page, even if some are full page like this, some are smaller illustrations. They're all done in black and white. Altogether, there's more than 160 illustrations. So with this book, it does take place in the same Westeros world of a Game of Thrones, but this book is set 100 years prior to those events, and we're following the story of Duncan Egg. Dunk is a hedge knight, and he takes on this like squire whose nickname is Egg. I loved their dynamics together. I know they're going to be making this into a TV show adaptation, I've heard, and I'm definitely looking forward to it because I really enjoyed my time with this book. I gave it 5 stars. I was a little bit nervous reading something else from George R.R. Martin that isn't part of the exactly like the Game of Thrones Song of Fire and Ice series, but I am glad I picked this one up because it did not disappoint me. I enjoyed his writing even when he's writing about different characters. The only like negative, which isn't really like a negative, but that I could say about this book is there are a lot of characters, specifically when we're talking about like the Targaryen line, and I had a little bit of difficulty keeping track of who was who and how people were related, and if there were a like character or family tree at the beginning of this book or end of this book, I feel like that would just be so helpful in general, because I found myself Googling a family tree of the Targaryens so I can try and like make a little bit of sense more of like where everybody's falling in line. There is going to be a sequel to this book coming out, but who knows when. I'm not going to be holding my breath. It's anytime soon, but I'm thinking maybe in the next year or two. I hope it's sooner rather than later because I can't wait to continue on with the adventurous stories that we're following along with Duncan Egg. I think that they are 2 really memorable characters that I just enjoy reading about. Next, we have a very super new release. This book only came out in the month of April, and it is a highly anticipated one for me to get to, and that was Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. Mandel. If you have read her other book that she came out with first was Station 11, and I read both that one and The Glass Hotel, which you don't need to read before you go into this one, but if you do read those two before you go into Sea of Tranquility, you will get more out of the book itself. I enjoyed the book. Looking back, I see I gave it 3 stars, but honestly, it's probably more of like 3.5, 3.75. Like, I really did enjoy it, but it's not something I feel like I'm going to be reaching for to read again. In the range of the 3 books of hers that I've read, I enjoyed Station 11 the most, this one, Sea of Tranquility the second, and The Glass Motel third, which I feel like is kind of the norm for most people who have read all 3 of them. We're following all these different characters, and they're in different points in time and just like completely different characters themselves. And I really enjoyed getting to know and be with each character. Like, each one really felt fully fleshed out. I figured eventually somehow their storylines were going to connect, but I didn't know how. I just was along for the ride. This is one of those books that's like super hard to explain the plot of what's going on within the book, so I'm not even gonna really attempt to do it too much because I am not gonna probably make any sense. And the fact that I have at this point read this book about a month ago, some of the details are a little bit more hazy now. I will say about Emily St. Mandel as an author in general, she is a good author. I will definitely be picking up whatever she releases next. I would not recommend this book to you if you're someone who doesn't like to read about pandemics while you're living in one, because I know at least one of the storylines, we were following this author who's on a book tour as a pandemic is setting in. And so, like I said, if you're not into reading about pandemics during pandemics, then maybe skip this one. Next, we have another nonfiction book, and that is Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. This book I gave 4 stars, although I kind of feel weird rating somebody's memoir, but I did enjoy this book. This was my second time reading something from this author. So I originally read Salvage the Bones a few years ago now, and I loved it so much. I believe I gave that one 5 stars. And so I've been wanting to read something else from this author. It's just taken me a while to get around to picking up another book by her, and I'm glad that I chose this one. This one is definitely a hard-hitting book, which I expect it to be, based off of reading Salvage the Bones and off of reading the plot of what this book was going to be about. In this memoir, she's looking at the community that she was raised in, which is Daleville, Mississippi. Over the course of 4 years, she lost 5 men in her life, one of them being her brother. And we're going through looking at the circumstances of their death, how their lives were, shining a spotlight on these people and the community that she's from, issues that they're dealing with, looking at the history of racism and also of economic struggle in the areas that they came from. Also, at the same time, she's just processing, going through all these experiences and her own grief from losing these people who were in her life. It is overall, like I said, a hard-hitting book, a lot of harder, darker subject matter, but I feel like I like the way that she approached and write about it. Overall, I really liked the tone that the author Jesmyn took with this book, in that I feel like she handles all the subject matters very respectfully and not in just like a trauma porn type of way, just to get you to feel the most emotions from all this. Although I will say it is definitely emotional, especially the section where she's talking about losing her brother. So just take that in mind, that it is very hard-hitting subjects that she's talking about. So but still ones that are worth reading about and definitely very important. I had actually a pretty good reading month in the month of April, so the next book I want to talk to you guys about was one that I also rated 5 stars. I do not own a physical copy of it yet, but I will be ordering a copy on Book Depository soon because I know I want to reread it eventually, and I think the cover on this is just beautiful. The book I'm talking about is called Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow, and like I said, I gave this book 5 stars. I actually listened to it on audiobook, which I feel like is kind of rare for me to give an audiobook 5 stars, but this one deserved it. This is a debut novel, and we're following 3 generations of this one family that lives in the South. We're following these multiple alternating perspectives, which I'm just loving. I love multi-generational family stories, and when they're written well, they can just be like my favorite type of story to read. We're following Joan, and she's with her mom and her sister. They're fleeing an abusive situation with Joan's father. at home, so they're fleeing to Memphis. I believe it was from like Louisiana that they were coming from. They go to live with Joan's aunt and her aunt's son, which there is a back history of something that happened between him and Joan in the past. We follow also the perspectives of Joan's mother and her grandmother, and they all just have such amazing stories. Like, I have no complaints about this book, you guys. I would highly recommend it to you to check it out if it at all sounds interesting to you or was on your radar at all. I cannot wait to get to it again, and I cannot wait to own it as well. The next book I want to talk to you guys about was not as good. Unfortunately, it was also on my most anticipated reads of the year list, which that reaction video should be coming out hopefully sometime this month. And that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady by Maria Gainza, and it's translated by Thomas Bunstead. I gave this book 2 stars. I actually did not finish it though, so maybe I should actually bump my rating down to 1 star. I don't know. The book started off so promising. I checked this out as if I checked this book out from my library as an ebook on the Libby app, and I'm glad I didn't pay money on it because while I really enjoyed like the first part of the book, and the book is very short, I figured even when I got to the parts that I wasn't enjoying as much, I could like just power through and maybe I would enjoy it more. But I feel like by the time I powered through the middle section, I had just lost all momentum and interest in keeping on with the book. I was so bored, and I was just like, no. Even though I only had like 50 pages or something to read, I was just like, I'm not going to force myself to finish this book. So we're following the story of this auction house employee who is working on the trail of a master forger in the Buenos Aires art world. Other than that, I can't really tell you guys too much because, like I said, the book really lost me, and once it did, I just like all thoughts of it went out of my brain. There is another book I have on my TBR from the same author, Optic Nerve, but now I'm a little bit nervous to go into that one because of how much I just really didn't like this one. But the thing is, the first part, it was so well written and so interesting that I feel like I could give this author another chance and see if I were to get on better with her other books. So I don't know, we'll see. Next, we have the only book that I was able to complete that was part of my series that I'm working on right now, and that was Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. So this was the first book in the Tony Man trilogy. I gave this book 4 stars. I feel like I've given on pretty much every book that I read by Robin Hobb 4 stars, and I'm really enjoying, well, I really enjoy being back in the world with Fitz and the Fool, and how little things from the previous 2 trilogies are kind of hinted at and brought into more into this one. I really enjoy Robin Hobb's writing, even though like not a lot of stuff happens and it can be just a lot of nothing sometimes. Just being like, when I say that, I mean like we're just in people's head, especially with this book going back to being just in Fitz's head, where in the previous trilogy, the Live Ship Traders trilogy, we were following so many different perspectives. It's nice to go back to just one person again, and someone that we're very familiar with, even though Fitz is very much older than he was in the first series. I can't really give too much away because I don't want to spoil in case someone is watching this and eventually does want to get to the Robin Hobb books, and this now is basically like the sixth book in the whole series. So as we get further along, I can't really say too much without giving spoilers, but I did enjoy this book. I am currently about 1/3 of the way into the second one. So yeah, I enjoyed the series. There was actually definitely a scene in this book that made me cry and tear up a little. Like I said, I won't tell you guys any spoilers, but if you do get to this one, just be prepared for that. Next, we have this beautiful book, and that is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is my first book by the author. This edition specifically is illustrated by Luisa Rivera. So throughout the book, I want to say there's maybe like 10 to 12 different illustrations that the illustrator has made that go along with the events of the book itself. This book is one that's going to be so hard for me to talk about because I enjoyed this book, but there are very problematic things that happen in this book. And when I finished it, it was one of those things where I had to like immediately go online and see if I was the only one that felt a certain way about certain things. And I was glad to see that I was not the only one. First, I just want to talk about the writing of this book. Gabriel Garcia Marquez can write. I loved the writing. The writing itself, 5 out of 5 stars. It was so beautiful. I just loved savoring his words, and just the man can write. And then whoever made this edition of the book 5 out of 5 stars for book design. I love it. But as far as the problematic issues, it made it so I could not rate this book as highly. I gave this book on Goodreads like 4 stars, but it could have been a 5-star read. It had potential. So I don't know how much I should even say, but like I will tell you guys. So I didn't know anything going into this book, also because this specific edition doesn't really have a synopsis. I couldn't really refresh myself for the plot of what was going on in this book. I know I have 2 books by this author on my shelf, so I figured I'm gonna read it no matter what it's about anyway. This book is kind of described as a love story, but I don't know. I just feel like it was the 2 characters that are in love. When we're following their story, it's just so like obsessive insta love, not based off of actually knowing the person, but just off of looking at them, basically. It wasn't even really love, more of like infatuation or in love with an idea that you have of someone that you don't really know. So we're following, yeah, these two who were, when they're younger, have this whatever thing, but she basically goes on to marry this wealthy doctor, and she'll be set up with for life. That's not a spoiler, because in the first chapter of the book, we're following them at old age with this couple. They didn't get married because she went on to marry this wealthy doctor guy, and in the first chapter we're following them when they're old and he dies. And so basically her old love affair dude from when she was a teenager is like, hey, your husband's dead, now let's get together. But yeah, I feel like he's waiting all this time for her, for this idea for her. He doesn't really know her. Florentino, who is the guy in this relationship, he is a very morally gray person. Like, I feel like some people say this is like a love story, but the fact is he was like obsessed with this girl, and she was just kind of like, we don't really know each other, and she moved on to some other dude. And as we follow him throughout his life story, maybe this is spoilers, I don't care, because I need to talk about the reason why this book is problematic, because he ends up having a relationship in his 50s with his, I believe it was like his niece or someone who was related to, and she is a teenager. She's like 14, and it's just kind of written about in a way like it's okay and it's normal, when no, that's disgusting. And it just didn't really make sense. Like, she was obsessed with him and she loved him, blah blah blah. Like, you can tell that this was written by a man, basically. So like I said, if you do choose to read this book, know that has some very morally gray characters and is problematic, and it's not truly a romantic love story. And I get, just because a certain character does something in a book doesn't mean an author thinks that that is okay, but the fact of the matter is there are people who do things that they shouldn't be doing, and that this person just decided to put in a book, I guess. So take that as you will as my review of this book. Next, we have another new release, and that was Cherishpharah by Bethany C. Morrow. This book I had such high hopes for, and unfortunately it was a little bit disappointing. I'm including it in this wrap up, even though technically I finished it on like the first day of May, but I don't want to have to wait a whole month to talk about it to you guys, but because I will forget probably everything that happened in this book, honestly, by that point. So I gave it 2 stars. It was finishable. The writing wasn't bad, but it was just like the plot and stuff. I was expecting more maybe, or I just wasn't crazy with where it went. I purchased this book, a physical copy, without even reading it, because I was hoping that it was just going to be so great. And I love the cover on this too, which is disappointing because I am going to be unhauling this book probably. This book is described as a new adult social horror novel, and I was really hoping for it was going to be so great, but it was not. So we're following these 2 girls. One of them, they're both black and they're both teenagers. One of them has white parents. She was adopted as a child, and the other one is currently living with them because of the situation that she has going on at home that's not good. With each other, they have this very manipulative relationship, not healthy. You can definitely tell, and as the novel goes on, you get to see more and more how unhealthy the relationship is. There's all these like slightly weird things that kind of start happening, and I was really interested for where it was going to go. And there was like a red herring moment earlier in the book where I was like, oh, is that what's gonna happen? I don't know. Like, it wasn't like terrible. I just wasn't hugely impressed. I just wanted more from this book, and what that more was, I couldn't tell you, but it just overall left me feeling slightly underwhelmed when I finished it. And I was just, when I got to the ending, like, I just wanted to know what was going on, if I was like correct in what I was thinking. But other than that, yeah, I just don't really have too many thoughts on this one. It's not really one I would recommend to a lot of people. Yeah, which is very, very disappointing. Now, on a more positive note, onto a better book I read last month was Tripping Arcadia by Kit Mayquist. This one I read as an ebook from my library. This is the author's debut novel, and it's marketed as an atmospheric modern gothic with all the splendor of the Great Gatsby, and I believe that's spot on. It was so atmospheric. It was a modern gothic novel. It was what I was looking for as far as those types of vibes. We're following the story of Lena. She's a med school dropout. She's basically very desperate to start making income because she's moved now back home with her family. So she ends up taking on this assistant caregiver role to this very like famous family, and they're specifically helping with their son, but it's in the house. It's like the father lives there and the sister and the brother. The brother is sick. He takes a lot of medication, but she doesn't really know like what exactly he has, but you can physically tell that he is very sick. So by day, she is just basically this what seemingly normal assistant to the doctor who's helping, in-home doctor who's helping take care of this rich kid. But at night, there's these parties that happen where she's also assisting the doctor, and I don't want to give away too much stuff that happens, but these parties are crazy. Throughout that, it all like it just starts escalating more and more stuff, and I really enjoyed this book. It didn't go exactly where I thought it was going to. It was very entertaining. I guess one of the only things that held me back a little bit was I found like some of the writing to be a little bit too flowery and descriptive, and I do appreciate that type of writing, but at a certain point, like, we don't need so much of that. But altogether, like, I don't really have any huge complaints with this book. I thought it was very entertaining, and I will definitely be reading anything else that this author decides to release next. And also, we need a moment of appreciation for how beautiful the cover on this book is. It's the first thing that drew me into wanting to find out what this book was about, and when the book actually lives up to the claim that it's going to be an atmospheric gothic novel, then I definitely appreciate that too. Then I listened to a couple of audiobooks that were thriller mysteries. I don't really want to talk about them too much. Neither of them really were wows to me. Like, they were interesting. I don't regret reading them. They kept my attention, but they're probably not something I'm going to really think about again in the future. So they fit for the moment, is what I'm saying. And so the first one was Curfew by Jane Coe, which are in this near future Britain world. Women have instituted this thing called the curfew. So I forget what time it was, maybe say it was like 9 o'clock or whatever. All the men have to be inside and they can't leave their houses. They can be arrested or get jail time for doing that. Basically all of this is to curb male violence, and violence has gone down significantly because of this. Okay, it was 7 p.m. 7 p.m. was when they had to be inside by. They all have these electronic tags too, so there's no way you can get around this. We're following a few different women. One of them is one of the people who works in these tagging centers, and she is someone who actually had her husband locked up because he went out without his tag. And then we're following her daughter, who is kind of anti everything. She just feels like men are being discriminated against and that this is very unfair. They should not have to go through what they're doing. And then I think the third perspective I think was Helen, who was a teacher at one of the schools, who she really wants a baby, and they have to go through this whole like class to be able to have like live with their partners to see if they'll be compatible or not. At the beginning of the novel, we find out that one of the women has been murdered, and we don't know which one. I feel like that's one of the things that really kept me listening to the book, was trying to figure out, okay, which one of these is the one that was murdered and how did it happen, because they find this footage and it looks like a man did it, but technically like a man can't leave his house after 7 p.m., which is when this murder happened. And like I said, they can't because they have this electronic tag that goes off. So altogether, it was an interesting, entertaining book, although it wasn't like super memorable. I did find some parts hard to believe that the government would be able to get away with doing these things and that men would just go along with it. And so I feel like that part kind of took away a lot of my belief in a lot of these different things that are brought up in the book that are done against men. The other one I listened to was 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. This is my first Peter Swanson book. I have a few of his other ones on my want to be read shelves on my Goodreads, but this is the first one that I have read. And In this book, where the whole premise is all 9 people each receive this list, and it has 9 names on it, and one by one the people on it keep dying, and so they're trying to figure out who's doing this and how before basically everybody on the list is dead. I thought it was okay. It was interesting enough. It's one of those books where you can kind of like tune out and still like bring your mind back in and not really have missed out too much, really. So in that case, it was like easy to listen to when I really wasn't wanting to pay that most attention, but I wanted to listen to something, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't really have too many thoughts, like I said, about these 2 mystery thrillers. They were okay, but not ones that I would highly recommend if you're into mystery thrillers. I feel like there's better ones out there. And the last book I want to talk to you guys about is one that I actually did not like, and I didn't finish, and that is Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. This was my second attempt at trying to read this book, and it didn't happen, so I feel like now I'm just going to give up. It's time to let this book go off my shelves. And especially after reading Night Film, which is like super hyped up by her, and being kind of really let down and disappointed in that one, I still wanted to give her as an author another try, but honestly I just couldn't do it. I tried listening to this one actually on audiobook, and I just found it really boring. Like we're following this one girl, like obviously I didn't get too far, so I don't know too much about it, but we're following this main character, and I just feel like she was so pretentious, like pretentiously written, her and like her relationship with her dad, and like, oh, they're so literary and so well educated and blah blah blah. They know how to reference all of these things that make them sound really smart, and I just found it kind of boring. I did not care, so I was not going to push myself through like I kind of did with Night Film, especially because this book is pretty long. It's over 500 pages. The audiobook I think was like super long too, like 16 hours or something like that. I know there's some type of murder or something that happens at one point, and honestly it just wasn't even interesting enough for me to continue on to even get to the point where that even happens. So yeah, unfortunately this one is going to be leaving my shelves. So those are all of the 13 books I wanted to talk to you guys about today. This video was already long enough as it was, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up here. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your days, and welcome to my, I guess now that it's nighttime outside, my book reviews after dark. You know, we can maybe make this a regular thing, because it's kind of harder for me to record sometimes during the day. One, there's actually good lighting because I'm typically at work, so it's nice. Maybe we can do this as a change of scenery every once in a while. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good time reading, and I'll see you soon. Bye.